All right, let's talk about React. If you've even touched web development, you've heard the name, but what is it really? Today, we're going to pull back the curtain and break down the absolute core concepts that made this one library a total game changer for building pretty much everything on the web. Let's dive in.
So you got to ask the big question, right? In a world just jam-packed with tools and frameworks, how did React become the one? How did it get picked up by everyone, from tiny startups to massive companies like Facebook and Netflix? Well, the answer isn't just a list of features. It's about the fundamental problem it was built to solve.
You see, back in the day, before React, building a really complex web app, well, it could get messy, fast. You'd have this tangled web of code trying to keep track of what part of the screen updates when a user clicks a button. We have a name for that: UI spaghetti code. It was a nightmare to read, a total headache to debug, and almost impossible to maintain as your app got bigger.
So React's solution to all that chaos was, well, it was brilliantly simple. It said, stop trying to manage your user interface as one giant, complicated thing. Instead, what if you could break it down into small, independent, and, this is the key, reusable pieces? You can just think of them like Lego blocks.
And this right here, this is the absolute heart of React, a component. It's just a piece of your user interface. It can be something tiny, like a single button, or it can be huge, like an entire page. The main idea is that each component manages itself. It handles its own logic and its own appearance, all bundled up together.
This quote just nails the entire philosophy. It's a total shift in how you think about building a UI. You don't start with a blank page anymore. You look at a design and you immediately start drawing mental boxes around everything. The nav bar, that's a component. The search field, that's another one. The user profile card, you guessed it, another component.
So what are these magical components, really? Well, under the hood, they are surprisingly simple. At its core, a React component is usually just a plain old JavaScript function. Its main job? To return a chunk of markup, that's the visual part, that looks almost exactly like HTML. That's it.
And just like with real Legos, you can snap these components together to build something way more complex. You can take that simple MyButton component we just made and pop it inside a profile card component, which itself might live inside your main app component. This nesting is literally how you build entire applications from these small, super manageable pieces.
Now, you might be looking at that syntax and thinking, wait a minute, is that HTML inside of my JavaScript? What is going on? This, my friend, is called JSX, and it's one of React's genuine superpowers. Let's demystify it right now. So here's the secret. While JSX looks and feels a lot like HTML, it's actually just JavaScript in disguise. See, behind the scenes, all of that tag-looking stuff gets converted into regular JavaScript function calls. The genius here is that you get to write your logic and your markup for a component in the exact same place, which makes your code so much cleaner and easier to reason about. And this is where the real magic happens. Anytime you're writing that HTML-like markup in JSX and you need to use a JavaScript variable or run some logic, you just use these curly braces. Think of it like a little escape hatch back into JavaScript. This is how you do things like display a user's name from a variable, or set an image source dynamically. It's incredibly powerful.
Okay, so we've got our organized components and this awesome JSX syntax. But what makes React apps feel so snappy and fast? The answer is its secret weapon, the virtual DOM. Now, you have to understand, JavaScript itself is blazing fast. The slow part of web development has always been updating the actual web page, what we call the DOM.
Yeah, every single time you add or update an element on your web page, the browser has to do a ton of work behind the scenes. It's got to recalculate layouts, repaint the screen. It's expensive. In a complex app where data is changing all the time, doing this directly over and over again can seriously bog things down and make your app feel sluggish.
So React's incredibly clever solution is to say, you know what? I'm not going to touch the real DOM unless I absolutely have to. Instead, it keeps a lightweight copy of the DOM structure just sitting in memory. This is the virtual DOM. It's basically just a big JavaScript object, which makes it incredibly fast and cheap to mess with.
And it all comes together in this really smart update process. So when some data in your app changes, React first updates its super fast virtual DOM in memory. Then, it compares this new virtual version with the old one it had. Using a smart algorithm, it figures out the absolute minimum number of changes needed to make the real screen match. And only then does it perform those tiny surgical updates on the actual page. It avoids all that unnecessary work, and that's the secret to React's performance.
Okay, so we have all these wonderful isolated components. But how do they talk to each other? How does a button in one component tell the main page that something happened? Well, React enforces a very clear and predictable pattern for this called one-way data flow.
Now to get this, you have to understand the two types of data in React, props and state. Think of it like this. Props are how a parent component passes data down to its children. They're like instructions. The child can read the props, but it can't change them. State, on the other hand, is a component's own private memory. It's the data that the component itself is in charge of, and it can change that data over time based on things like user clicks.
This creates a really predictable cycle. Check it out. A parent component holds the important data in its state. It then passes that data down to a child as props. The child then renders itself based on those props. But what if the child needs to change the data? Well, it can't do it directly. Instead, it sends a message, an event, back up to the parent. The parent hears that message, updates its own state, and the whole cycle starts over, with new, fresh data flowing back down. This one-way street makes debugging your app so much easier.
And this whole process has a name: lifting state up. Whenever you have a few different components that all need to share the same changing data, the React way is to find their closest common parent component, and you move the state there. That parent then becomes the single source of truth and just passes the data down to all the children that need it. It's the key to keeping your UI in sync.
All right, let's bring it all home. We've gone from messy spaghetti code to clean, reusable Lego blocks. We've talked about JSX and the super-fast virtual DOM. These are the core ideas, the foundation you need to really start thinking in React.
So let's recap the big takeaways. First, think in components. Break everything down into reusable UI Lego blocks. Second, embrace JSX. Use its superpowers to combine your logic and markup. Third, trust the virtual DOM to keep your app feeling fast. And finally, manage your data with that predictable one-way flow using props and state. These 4 pillars are what make React so powerful and honestly, so much fun to work with.
You know, understanding these concepts is the biggest hurdle. React isn't just about learning some new syntax. It's a completely different and powerful way of thinking about how to build user interfaces. So the real question isn't just what you learned today, but what are you going to go build with it? Thanks for joining this explainer and happy coding!